Welcome back to Unit 7, Topic 7.5. This is World War I, Military and Diplomacy. So, we're going to start by looking at the background to World War II. What caused the war? So, first of all, this war was also called the Great War. Remember that until World War II happened, nobody would have known that this was World War I, so they called it the Great War. And it erupted due to a combination of different things. First of all, militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and then the kind of the thing that sparked it all off was the assassination of this guy named Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So, as far as militarism goes, so there was kind of like a military arms race. And what you need to know is that Germany was a new country at this time. And so Germany had been unified in about 1870 and maybe 1871, and it was coming to the colonization game late. And so by this time, France and England had colonized most of the world. Most of the places that could be colonized or had good resources and were worthwhile to be colonized had been colonized. And these places, through labor that were being done in the colonies, through resources that were being extracted from the colonies, were bringing immense wealth to England and France. And so Germany now is coming into this game. It begins to militarize because as a country, it thinks that, well, we want to get some colonies. We want to be a top tier country, but Germany and France have all the good places. So if we want to get some colonies, we're going to have to take them from Germany or France. From Britain or France, England or France. And so it begins militarizing, and the German economy is huge. And Germany quickly becomes a very powerful country. It would have been very powerful, but remember, it was split up into a bunch of different you could say regions, and the German people were not united, and they eventually become united, and so they quickly become a very powerful country in Europe, and they want to challenge Britain and France, and so they begin building their military, and Britain and France see this, England and France see this, and so let's say Germany has like 3 warships, Britain will build 4. And then Germany builds a 5th one, and Britain builds a 6th one. And not that that's how many they actually had, but to illustrate the concept of an arms race. And so this militarism buildup begins to happen. Germany, Britain, and France, all of them begin this huge military buildup. And particularly in terms of the Navy, this is a big arm race. Now, another thing that happened is that there's a series of alliances. And so European powers form, now they're going to be secret alliances, and basically as Britain and France are building up and they see that Germany is building up militarily, Britain and France secretly say to each other, if somebody attacks you, the other one will come into the battle. And so if somebody attacks Britain, France will help defend Britain and declare war on the country that attacks Britain or England. And so now that was one of them. Now at the same time, France and Russia make a secret alliance, but that Britain doesn't know about. And so the same kind of alliance where if somebody attacks one, the other one will come to the aid of the country that's being attacked. And so, because all of these countries are afraid of Germany because it's militarizing. And so at this point, think about the secret alliances, because if, let's say, somebody attacks Russia, if Germany attacks Russia, Britain now doesn't know it's in an alliance with Russia. Well, how could that be? Because France has pledged to come to the aid of Russia. And so if France declares war on Germany, then Germany will declare war on France, start attacking France, and now England has to come to the aid and declare war on aid of France and declare war on Germany. So, but it gets a little bit deeper because Russia is also going to make an alliance with a very tiny country. It's kind of a new country at this time called Serbia, and so same type of deal. If Serbia is attacked, Russia will attack the country that's attacking Serbia. And now Britain and France are also in alliance without knowing it with this little country called Serbia. And so that's one alliance. And then there's another alliance that's secret. So Germany, something called the Austria-Hungarian Empire, that's right here. So this is the German Empire. This is the Austria-Hungarian Empire. And this is the Ottoman Empire. They are going to make an alliance as well. Okay? And so we can see the military alliances here. So what's called the Triple Entente, these are the green ones. This is United Kingdom, France, Russia, and these are Slavic allies of Russia. So Slavic, let me see it. It's just kind of like a language and culture family, and Russia and Serbia are in the same language and culture family, and so Russia is supporting Serbia. And then the Triple Alliance, we can see these countries are in alliance together along with the Ottoman Empire. And so basically, if one country gets attacked, all of Europe's going to go to war, and they don't necessarily even know that that's going to happen because these are secret alliances. Secondly, thirdly is nationalism. So nationalism fostered a sense of superiority and competition among nations. Ethnic groups under imperial rule, such as the Serbs under Austria-Hungary, also sought self-determination. So right here is Serbia, and this is Austria-Hungary. So Serbia is kind of a new country, and what you need to know is there are some ethnic Serbs, some people who, for all intents and purposes, are just as much Serbians as these people, but they're in another country. And so what they want to do is break off and join Serbia. And so this idea of nationalism is the idea that ethnicities should have their own country. Like French people should belong to France, German people should belong to Germany, Italian people should belong to Italy. Now that might seem obvious to us, but for both Germany and Italy, they didn't really become a single nation. There was no nationalism there. That was split up into smaller divisions than that until the late 1800s. And so this idea of nationalism, Serbian people also want to be their own country. Another one is imperialism. As we talked about, European powers competed for colonies in Africa and Asia. And so particularly Germany, because of imperialism, feels left out of the game. Now, where did this all come into place? Now, I could go really far into the details of this, but basically here in Serbia, the reason why I mentioned Serbia is that Austria-Hungary, these Serbs who were living in southern Austria-Hungary didn't have voting rights, and they were kind of treated as second-class citizens by the Austria-Hungarian Empire. And then the Archduke of the Austria-Hungarian Empire was this guy named Franz Ferdinand, and he's the heir to the throne. And he says, when I come in power, I'm going to give voting rights to these Serbs, and they're going to have a place at the table, and that way they won't want to leave and separate from us and join Serbia. Now, you would think this would make Serbia happy. You think this would make the separatist group happy that you're empowering us, but it actually makes them kind of mad because they don't want to be they don't want to even have a place at the table within the Austria-Hungarian Empire. They want to join Serbia. And this kind of generosity towards them, towards the people, is going to kind of, what we would say, soothe the people, and they're not going to want to become separatists and join into Serbia. So they're afraid that this gesture of kindness that Archduke Franz Ferdinand is planning is actually going to work and keep the ethnic Serbs in southern Austria-Hungary happy in the empire and not want to join Serbia. So Serbia begins to give more funding to separatist organizations in that area of Austria-Hungary, one of which is the Black Hand, and through a series of events, while Archduke Franz Ferdinand is in southern Austria-Hungary, kind of like on a parade, somebody tries to assassinate him, doesn't work, his driver speeds off but gets lost, and then another one of the planned assassins just happens to be getting lunch at this place and sees the guy trying to pull around in an alleyway, and he goes over and shoots him and kills him and his wife and the taxi cab driver. And so at this point, so that happens in southern Austria-Hungary. And Serbia here, remember, had been funding the separatist group that did this called the Black Hand, and the guy who did it, his name was Gavrilo Principe. And so they capture Gavrilo Principe. There was also in the parade that Archduke Franz Ferdinand was in, somebody else threw a grenade, but it didn't get, it kind of bounced off of the Archduke's car and kind of exploded in the car behind. But this guy tried to commit suicide, but as he was running away, didn't work. They caught him. They kind of find out from these two people that, lo and behold, Serbia was funding the Black Hand. And so Austria-Hungary ends up declaring war on Serbia. So now you remember the secret alliances. So think about it. Maybe pause the video and think about what's going to happen. Okay, did you think about it? So who's going to come to Serbia's aid here? Well, Russia. Russia is going to come to Serbia's aid because Russia is Serbia is a Slavic ally of Russia. Well, if Russia comes to Serbia's aid, right? So Russia is then going to declare war on Austria-Hungary. That's the only way that you can come to Serbia's aid. Well, if Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary, maybe pause the video, try to think what's going to happen next. Well, several things are going to happen next. So first of all, there's two things. First of all, Germany has a secret alliance with Austria-Hungary. So Germany is going to declare war on Russia and kind of also Serbia, but Serbia is kind of going to be a small player in all this. Okay, so now we have Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and Serbia involved. So remember, Russia here, who is allied with Russia? Well, France. So France is now going to be declaring war on these countries right here, the German Empire and Austria-Hungary. And remember, the Ottoman Empire also came in here to support Austria-Hungary and the German Empire. And now the United Kingdom is going to come and be on the side of France and Russia. And so it sounds kind of complicated, but that is the cause of the war. So you could say, what was the cause? Militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and assassination. And so you should be familiar with all those different causes to World War I. So the war, now we know how the alliances were set up. The war is going to begin swiftly after the assassination. And so the assassination was on June 28th, 1914. That's the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by this guy named Gavrilo Principe, who was a Serbian nationalist. And so the war is going to begin. So that's the start of it. Then a month later, on July 28th, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. And then on July 29th, the next day, Russia, an ally of Serbia, is going to mobilize its military. And then on August 1st, that's a couple of days later, Germany declares war on Russia. And on August 3rd, that's a couple of days later, Germany declares war on France. So Germany invaded Belgium on August 4th, prompting Britain to declare war on Germany. So it takes about a month after the assassination, and within a month you have Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Russia, Germany, France, and Britain all in the war. So the war escalated from a regional conflict in this area called the Balkans and into a global war due to these alliances. And remember, this war is truly going to be global because the British Empire is huge, the French Empire is huge, and so it's not just going to involve Europe. Okay, so some of the key battles of the war. Let's look right here. So we have the Battle of Verdun, and this is going to be one of the longest and bloodiest battles in World War I. And it's going to last, this is in 1916. And it's going to last from February to December, and it resulted in 430,000 German and 550,000 French casualties. Also in 1916, you have the Battle of the Somme. And from July to November, this offensive saw over 1 million casualties, epitomizing the horrors of trench warfare and modern weaponry. And then we have the Battle of Ypres, and several battles occurred in this region, including poison gas as a weapon of war. So one thing that you should know is that Germany thought that it could quickly cut through here, invade France, get to Paris, and get the French to cede some territory to Germany, or give up some of its colonies to Germany, something like that, and the war would be over quickly. And so what ended up happening, though, is this idea of French, or not French warfare, it would have been French warfare because it was in France, but trench warfare. And you can see there's these trenches or these big ditches that are going to be dug out. And so when Germany comes into here, the French and the British are going to be dug in trenches. And this is, trench warfare is entirely new. Also, it's going to be very modern warfare. And so it's going to have these modern weapons. And so the idea is that when somebody is dug in a trench, it's very hard to overcome. Even if you send, let's say, like 50,000 people towards the trench, well, your guys are in the wide open in an area called no man's land. That would be the land between the enemy trenches. And the enemy can just stick their heads up a little bit over the trench and shoot, and they have the whole body to shoot at, and you only have like a little helmet to shoot at, and it's a head, but it has a helmet on it anyway. And so the idea is you're just going to get mown down. And so even if you can overcome their position, if you're losing 25 guys, as Germany is going into France to their one guy, for the French and the British, you're quickly going to run out of people. And so what's going to happen is there's a lot of initial movement, and then people, the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians, are just going to get into trenches. And so that's what's here. And then Germany is fighting a two-front war. It's also fighting over here. So that is how the initial fighting started. Okay, so remember, this is a U.S. history class, so we want to really understand what is the U.S. response to all of this. And so at this point, the United States initially pursued a policy of neutrality. So World War II in Europe started in 1914. United States is not really going to come in until 1917, late in the 1917, and we're not going to get a large number of troops into the battle until 1918. And so 3-4 years later, United States is going to come in. Okay, and so this is United States' long-standing tradition of avoiding European entanglements. And remember, one of the reasons why the U.S. likes neutrality is it goes all the way back to George Washington. And when Washington was giving his kind of his farewell address, he told people to avoid European entanglements, that getting involved in these wars overseas would be a hindrance to, or impediment to, American independence. And so the United States had just gained its independence, and it couldn't afford to be fighting for anyone except for the United States because it had too many enemies. And so this tradition of neutrality was very strong in the United States. So Woodrow Wilson is going to keep the United States out of the war. It's going to keep the United States neutral. And so, but what you're going to see is that the United States, as we'll talk about later, is going to be more attached to Britain just financially. So the United States is going to be selling supplies to really any country. As a neutral nation, we had the right to sell to any country, but because of things like blockades, it was harder for us to get things to Germany than it was to get things to Britain. And so we sold a lot more things to Britain, and eventually Britain and France, they kind of run out of money, and so our businesses have to loan them money. And so because they owe us all this money, we have a vested interest in them winning the war. And so although the United States is neutral, there is an economic attachment to France and Britain. And so during the election of 1916, Woodrow Wilson runs again, and he wins a very close election. And he campaigned on the slogan, "He kept us out of war," and that really reflected the public sentiment for non-involvement. Now, there was something that happened. So Germany, they had, so initially at the beginning of the war, Germany's surface navy was wiped out by Britain. And then they had something called submarines or U-boats. And these U-boats, they're not like submarines today. They were very limited. It was really hard for Germany to take out a British naval vessel, like a war vessel, with one of their submarines. However, they would be able to take out cargo vessels. So if cargo was coming from the United States, these submarines would be able to take out these cargo vessels. And so that's what they ended up doing. And the idea here is that if Britain and France cannot, especially Britain, cannot get food and supplies from its colonies or even from the United States, then it's going to be harder for them to fight the war over the long term. And so that was one of the things that Germany was doing with these U-boats. Now, it was hard probably to tell the difference between, okay, what's a cargo vessel and what's, a passenger vessel. And so in 1915, Germany accidentally kind of sunk this British passenger vessel. And remember, the idea was like any ship with a British flag on it that's a cargo vessel is open game. And so they thought the Lusitania was a British cargo vessel, but it was really a British passenger vessel, and there was a lot of Americans on it. So out of the 1,200 people that were on it, and all of them died, about 128 of them were Americans. And so remember, this is in 1915, and so this created tensions with the U.S. Obviously, if Germany is killing American citizens, that's going to create big tensions with the United States. However, Woodrow Wilson chose not to go into war. Remember, this is before the election of 1916, and so he kept us out of war. But he did get Germany to agree to not sink any more vessels that had Americans on them. And so that was the stance. And Wilson's stance emphasized the defense of humanitarian and democratic principles, yet economic and strategic ties to allies began to pull us closer to involvement in the war. So there are several factors that drove the U.S. to enter the war. First, the biggest one is Germany started engaging in what's called unrestricted submarine warfare. So this was a practice that Germany put into place, and it kind of actually warned the world and wrote to the United States, even put ads in American newspapers that it was going to do this. It was just going to sink any ship that was going to Britain or France, whether it was a cargo vessel, whether it was a passenger vessel. And Germany was taking a calculated risk here because it knew, well, if this happens, the United States is going to come in the war. But Germany felt that it was in a position to quickly kind of win this war. And so through this unrestricted submarine warfare, even though it's sinking American ships and killing Americans and would draw the United States into the war, they thought, well, if we can starve Britain out, if we can starve out Britain and France, maybe we can just end this war before the United States, who is on a separate continent, has the ability to mobilize, to prepare its men, to train its men in boot camps and send them over. We can end the war before that time. And so that Germany started doing this in January of 1917. Another thing that happened in early 1917 is that there was something called the Zimmermann Note, and this was a secret proposal from Germany to Mexico that promised the return of lost territories like Texas and Arizona if Mexico allied with Germany. Now, there was no way that Mexico was going to do this. Mexico was kind of like going through its own internal conflicts at this time, and it just did not have any type of capability of going to war with the United States. And so this was a telegram that was intercepted by England, and then England showed it to the United States. And then this was something that inflamed the United States. Lastly, the something that I had mentioned already was economic ties. So the U.S. had stronger financial ties to the Allies, with American banks providing over $2.5 billion in loans to Britain and France compared to just $56 million to Germany. So that's something like Britain and France owed American businesses 50 times the amount that Germany did. And so because of this, if Britain and France lose the battle, they're not going to be able to pay back these companies in the United States. And the United States is going to go into a depression at this point because of that. Now, what you'll have to know is that because the United States has been selling so many things to Britain and France, it's actually improved the American economy quite significantly. And so if we have a huge economic vested interest in the Allies winning the war. And so in April of 1917, Congress declared war on Germany, and this was a dramatic shift in U.S. foreign policy. Okay, so the United States is ready to join the war. The United States has declared war, but there's a few problems. First of all, America does not have a lot of soldiers. It does not have a lot of people who are trained and in the army. So they passed something called the Selective Service Act in 1917, and it requires men aged 21 to 45 to register for the draft. And that leads to 2.8 million draftees and 2 million volunteers. So almost 5 million Americans entered the war. So the U.S. military grew rapidly, but it required time for training and deployment. And so the U.S. is actually going to deploy some soldiers in 1917, but mostly it's going to get over to Europe in the summer of 1918. And by this time, one thing that you definitely need to know is that Russia is out of the war. And so there was the Bolshevik Revolution, and Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks actually killed the Romanov Tsar of Russia, and they pulled Russia out of the war. And so Germany is no longer fighting a two-front war. It's just fighting a one-front war, trying to conquer France, with Britain aiding France. And so that's the war that the United States is going to enter into. Now, the balance, the American Expeditionary Forces are going to come into the middle of this war by, remember, it started in 1914, and by the time that Americans really begin to fight is going to be the summer of 1918. So the war's already been going on for 4 years at this point. And so when the Americans come in, one battle that they're going to help tip the balance in is the Second Battle of the Marne. That's going to be fought from July 15th to August 6, 1918, and it's going to mark a turning point in the World War I, and it's going to halt the last major offensive on the Western Front. Remember, the Western Front is the battle against France, the Eastern Front against Russia that is gone by this point. So the Germans launched their attack as part of their spring offensive, aiming to capture Paris and to force a decisive end to the war before American forces fully deployed. But there was an Allied counterattack. So with American troops significantly reinforcing the Allies, the counterattack was swift and effective. Under the command of French General Ferdinand Foch, the Allies utilized combined forces, including tanks and aerial support, to overwhelm German lines. And the outcome is that the German advance was stopped. The Allies began a successful counteroffensive, pushing the Germans back and securing critical territory. This victory boosted Allied morale and demonstrated the growing strength of the American expeditionary forces. The next battle was the Battle of Saint-Mihiel. And the overview is that it was fought from September 12th through the 15th in 1918. In this battle was the first major independent offensive led by American forces, and it was under General John J. Pershing. And Saint-Mihiel, a salient held by Germans since 1914, posed a threat to Allied supply lines. Capturing it was vital for Allies to secure their positions in France. So the AEF, supported by French troops, utilized innovative tactics, including coordinated infantry, artillery, and air attacks. This marked one of the first large-scale uses of aircraft in a coordinated role. And so the Americans quickly overcame and overwhelmed German defenses, capturing thousands of prisoners and clearing the area. The success demonstrated American military capability and solidified their role in the war. And then the other one is the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. So the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, that's from September 26th to November 11th, 1918, was the largest and final Allied offense of World War I. It involved over 1.2 million American troops, and it was the largest operation in U.S. military history at the time. So the goal was to break through the heavily fortified German Hindenburg Line, a critical defensive position, and force a German retreat. So some of the challenges were dense forests, rugged terrain, and heavily entrenched German defenses made this campaign extraordinarily difficult. Casualties were high, with American forces facing stiff resistance. And so despite the challenges, The offensive succeeded in pushing the Germans back, contributing to their eventual request for an armistice. The operation highlighted the growing strength and determination of the AEF and was pivotal in ending the war. In January of 1918, remember this is going to be before the wars that we just mentioned, Wilson is going to outline his 14 points. And so he's going to advocate things for things like open diplomacy. What open diplomacy means is that there's these secret, what you would say, allies, secret agreements that were made between countries. Go back and watch the beginning of this that kind of like set the stage for World War I to happen. Basically, countries get into war. They have alliances with countries like Britain. England had an alliance with Russia that it basically didn't know about because it had an alliance with France, who had an alliance with Russia, and all the alliances were secret. So open diplomacy. So basically, if Germany attacks a country, they should know who all that country's allies are so that it can know what it's getting into before it attacks. Another one is freedom of the seas. For instance, this is something that happened during the War of 1812 and continues to happen in the United States. The United States wants to be able to, thinks that it's fair, not just for the United States, but for countries in general, to be able to ship things to other countries without having their cargo and passenger vessels attacked or being boarded and not being allowed to sell things to different countries. Removal of economic barriers, reduction of armaments, adjustment of colonial claims, and so national self-determination for oppressed people, and something called the establishment of a League of Nations. And so this is going to be one of the most important things. And you can think of the League of Nations as like a predecessor to the United Nations. And so although these points are progressive, compromises were made during the Paris Peace Conference, that's in 1919, especially regarding the colonies and territorial disputes. So basically you need to know that Wilson comes out with these 14 points. And this is going to be a vast contrast, a stark contrast, I should say, with American foreign diplomacy up until this time. And so it's not going to go over well with the American people and with the American politicians. So the treaty negotiations were initially based upon the 14 points. So the background, so for these 14 points, as I mentioned, they outlined a vision for a peaceful post-war world. And one of the things is that President Woodrow Wilson did not so much want to punish Germany. In fact, he had this slogan, it said peace without victory. And what that means is that he didn't really want to grind Germany into the ground and make them pay. And so so that was one of this vision for a peaceful post-war world that was championing democracy. So he emphasized self-determination, free trade, disarmament, and the establishment of the League of Nations. It was very idealistic, and he aimed to prevent future conflicts by addressing the root causes of war and ensuring fair treatment of all nations, including the defeated Central Powers, as I mentioned. And so this is going to contrast actually with the other allies. So while the 14 points advocated for fairness and global cooperation, Wilson faced resistance from Britain and France, who prioritized reparations. That's getting paid. So they basically wanted Germany to pay for the war and maintaining their colonial empires. And so there was also fear of revolution and spread of communism that's going to force a compromise. And so remember the Bolshevik Revolution that happened in Russia in 1917 and subsequent communist uprisings across Europe created widespread fear of revolution and instability among the Allied powers. So to secure cooperation and prevent further upheaval, Wilson made concessions, diluting some of his 14 points. Reparations and punitive measures against Germany were included despite his opposition. This is something you're going to have to remember because it's going to kind of be one of the something that a lot of historians are going to blame as the catalyst for World War II is all these reparations that Germany is going to have to repay that's going to cripple their economy. So, and they're just not going to be able to pay it. And so the impact on the peace talks was the fear of communism shifted the focus of negotiations, prioritizing immediate stability over Wilson's long-term vision. And so the colonies were only stripped from the defeated nation. So there was selective redistribution. So the Treaty of Versailles stripped colonies from defeated nations like Germany and the Ottoman Empire, but allowed Britain and France to retain and expand their colonial holdings. And then tension in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. So former Ottoman territories, such as those in the Middle East, were placed under British and French mandates, disregarding the self-determination promised in Wilson's 14 points. And then there was a legacy of resentment. And so that selective treatment fueled nationalist movement in the Middle East and Southeast Asia as local populations felt betrayed and exploited by Western powers, sowing seeds of future conflicts. As was mentioned earlier, the Treaty of Versailles and Wilson's 14 points, even though they were diluted, were in stark contrast to traditional American foreign policy. And so the Treaty of Versailles is going to end up rejected by the Senate. And remember, 2/3 of the Senate has to approve of any treaty. There were divisions in the Senate. Opposition to the Treaty of Versailles came from two groups. Reservationists, led by Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, were willing to support the treaty with amendments, particularly concerning the League of Nations. One of the things is that Wilson was unwilling to change anything. Irreconcilables, who were a smaller faction, completely opposed the treaty in the League of Nations, fearing it would entangle the U.S. in foreign conflicts. So Wilson went on. He thought that his speaking tour would be able to save it. But let's look at some of the key concerns before we talk about that. So Article 10 of the League of Nations Charter, which required member nations to defend each other, was viewed as a potential loss of congressional authority to declare war. And skepticism about entangling alliances and preserving U.S. sovereignty dominated their argument. So Lodge's strategy, as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, delayed ratification, added reservations to the treaty, and rallied opposition to Wilson's vision. So Wilson went on a speaking tour. So determined to garner public support for the treaty, President Woodrow Wilson embarked on a nationwide speaking tour in 1919. Wilson championed the League of Nations as essential for maintaining global peace and preventing future wars. He portrayed opposition to the treaty as a portrayal of the sacrifices made during World War I, but his health declined, and so this grueling tour took a toll on Wilson's health, culminating in a severe stroke that left him incapacitated for the remainder of the presidency. This weakened his ability to negotiate with Senate opponents, and so Senate rejects the treaty mainly due to the League of Nations. So despite Wilson's effort, the Senate voted against ratifying the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 and again in 1920. So the reasons, there were concerns over U.S. involvement in the League of Nations, and as we mentioned, the loss of autonomy in foreign policy were central. Partisan politics also played a significant role. Remember, Wilson is a Democrat, with Republicans eager to undermine Wilson's Democratic administration. So the aftermath, the U.S. signed separate peace treaties with Germany and other nations, officially ending its involvement in World War I. The rejection of the treaty in League of Nations marked a retreat to isolationism in U.S. foreign policy, shaping American politics in the interwar years. So these events highlight the struggle between Wilson's idealistic internationalism and the Senate's commitment to preserving U.S. sovereignty.